There we go. Welcome, friends. Welcome to our webinar today, Connecting the Dots. It's good to see everybody and see some familiar faces in the participant list. My name is Helen Blyer. I serve as the director at the Center for Lifelong Learning here at Columbia Theological Seminary, as well as the president of the Association of Leaders in Lifelong Learning for Ministry, or as we call it, ALLM. I'm joined today by my friend and colleague Debbie Jin, who is the Director of Research at the Association of Theological Schools. Debbie has spearheaded a lot of really important research into all aspects of theological schools, and today we're going to be learning about the results of the periodic workforce study that ATS conducts among cohorts of member school graduates. In short, the study inquires into the employment of seminary graduates and their perceptions of their seminary experience. She's going to talk more about it when she's on. You can already tell that there's going to be some overlap between this study and the interests of lifelong learning leaders, which is why we invited her here today to talk about some of the results from their most recent survey. Today we're going to get an overview of some of that research, and we're going to put it in conversation with the data ALLM has just collected on lifelong learning programs and their leaders. So to get us started today, what I'd like you to do is to put your name in the chat where you're joining us from. I always love that, to see all the different places where people are coming from. And one curiosity or question that you're coming to us with. There. I'm going to be muting folks as you're joining if you haven't already muted yourself. There. So we're going to use the chat function as well as the raise hand function for any questions that you might have. We've got some dedicated Q&A time at the end, but if you've got a burning issue you absolutely have to ask about, go ahead under the React function that's on the bottom bar of your screen, and you'll see something that says raise hand. What that's going to do is put you at the top of my screen, and I'll be able to recognize the fact that you've got something to say, ask you to unmute, and go ahead and share. So anyways, once again, put your name, where you're calling in from, in the chat along with one question or curiosity you might have. So now I'm going to turn to Debbie. Debbie, welcome. It's always good to see you. Glad you're here. And you're coming to us today from
the beautiful and sunny state of Washington. I am so glad to be here. We moved from Philadelphia, or Pittsburgh, excuse me, Philadelphia. I'm already saying that. Earlier this year. So very, very glad to be back with family.
Great. You might remember that we did a version of this webinar back in 2021. We called it Hot Takes and Trends. It was mid-pandemic, and during that particular conversation, we talked about the 2017 workforce data and the just-in results of the 2020 research. So now we've got 2022 workforce data and 2025 research. So a lot has happened in those intervening 4.5 years. We've got a pandemic, we've got global crises, we've got political upheaval, we've got millions of money thrown into theological schools and programming, and so much growth and development in lifelong learning programs. So we're going to have some fun seeing what differences there are and what we can learn. I know I'm looking forward to it. So Debbie, let's start off by saying a word about lifelong learning, and from your perspective, why you think this is an important conversation for us to be having.
Well, what we saw, and I don't want to give too much of my own, steal my own thunder, but I mean, just overall, what we saw in the analysis of the alum survey, the workforce survey, and what they say that their needs are, there was not such good alignment
Yeah.
between what they say their needs are, so the job, and then what they are learning in seminary and the degree programs. And so this job credential misalignment is what we found, and probably we shouldn't have been so surprised, because this is ongoing conversation in higher education in general. So probably not shouldn't have been as surprised, as at least as I was. And so seeing that misalignment combined with kind of the emergence in the pathways programs, especially the pathways program, the schools, and kind of the growth in lifelong learning programs, non-degree programs. So those are some big areas that we have started to get our hands into and just start to find what's going on there. Um, we realized, so Joanne DC and I, we wrote this article. I'll reference it a little bit later. We saw that, so this kind of mismatch or the misalignment, there's some mismatches also. And what we realized is, okay, there's so much that ministers and clergy are needing. Their work is changing, and to put that all on the seminary curriculum, I think it's not reasonable.
Hmm.
It's too much. At the same time that the seminary is also trying to, shrink or at least
Hmm.
bring down the number of units, because that's not tenable as well. So if that's the case, how do we expect seminaries to do so much more in their degree programs, when it's very difficult to do that? So how do we get beyond that?
Well, not to bury the lead, but we're going to be talking about this exact thing towards the end of our conversation today, looking ahead. And part of what I'm going to be talking about during that section is some really interesting, very old data I've been nerding out on in seminary effectiveness and lifelong learning. Like, it was ever thus. Going back to 1934, seminaries weren't doing a great job in terms of aligning curricula with what the needs of ministers were. And frankly, it doesn't look like a whole lot has changed since then. So it does raise interesting questions then about, maybe seminaries aren't the best place to be carrying that whole load. And maybe, ATS's new standard on the importance of cultivating capacities for lifelong learning, was it 3.5, is a really important way for us to begin to think about seminary education. Let's go ahead and dive into the data. What data are we going to be looking
Okay.
at today, Debbie?
So we'll be looking, I'm going to show us first the competencies data because that's the heart of it. And I wanted everybody on the call, in case you haven't seen some of the material that we've published, that just get us all on the same page. And
So
then we're going to go,
these are surveys done with people from ATS member schools who had
right,
graduated at certain and they're at certain points after
right.
graduation. Am I right?
Right. Right.
Mhm.
So we're doing this now. We're going to be regularizing this survey after the success of the first two distributions. So for this last distribution in 22, we went to the graduating class just before. So I think we're calling it 2019/20.
Mhm.
And then we went back to the first two graduating classes, which were again separated by 5 years each. Um, that we had gone to in the first distribution. So we now have three graduating classes. We're going to continue to do that. We'll go back to the same graduating classes and just add the next one that had just graduated. So really excited to be able to look at kind of trends longitudinally that way.
Great.
So we'll be going through, I'm going to spend a couple of slides on the competencies just to kind of give us a good kind of uh, shared context. And then I'm going to spend a little time on another question that we actually haven't really talked too much about. We've gotten a lot of mileage on the competencies question, but this wish learned, we haven't really done much. So you all are getting the first look at the
Great.
wish learned analysis. Yeah.
Mhm.
All right. So for those of you who aren't familiar with what we've put out so far, the competencies item was basically a question. It was an open-ended item where we asked what skills, knowledge, dispositions do you most heavily rely on to do your work? So it's not related to anything related to the school and what they offered. It's just simply what do you rely on to do your work? We coded all of those, ended up with about 45 different competencies. So I'm going to show you the top 20, but always keep in mind that there are 25 others below whatever I show you here. So I wanted to show you first what we saw in 2017, just to kind of make a little bit of a comparison. The percentages are the proportion of alums who named a particular competency, and because they were given 5 opportunities to name something, the totals, of course, go way beyond 100%. So 5 years ago, there were several surprises, but one in particular was just, wow. three of the top 10 spots were this cluster: administration, leadership, and finance. We were just amazed that came out. The other surprises, but that was the main one. So then this time in 2022, we had some additional surprises, namely how these so-called soft skills rose in rank from the bottom half of the top
Wow. Yeah.
to the top 10. Yeah, absolutely. Intrapersonal competencies, quality job performance, spiritual disciplines also was at 6 and now rose to the very top. Couple quick little definitions here. Interpersonal competency would be responses such as willingness to serve or openness to others, kind of these social skills. Intrapersonal competency is more inward facing, so self-awareness, sense of resilience or agency, but also things like boundary setting and coping mechanisms.
Hmm.
Quality job performance would be those skills needed to do your job with excellence. So a sense of creativity or curiosity, critical thinking, etc. One last thing I wanted to mention here is, or two more things. One is that, because these rose in rank, then of course it displays to these others to the bottom half of the top 20. And then technology just missed the top 20, but that was one of the top two largest jumps in rank. So from 31st to 21st. Now, the second thing I wanted to mention is that I didn't get to show you, I normally do this on presentations, but I didn't want to spend too much time there. But we also asked a question about job context. So basically, where do you work? Open-ended, we coded all of those as well. And ended up with 4 main job areas where people are working. And we saw an increase in those who work in healthcare.
Hmm.
So combine that job context, kind of those shifts, with what seems to have risen in importance, or at least in frequency, is these soft skills. I think what we're seeing is kind of a rise in needs related to ministry during a global health pandemic. So we all know that there was an overall increase in an awareness of, but also interest around mental health during the years of the pandemic. So I think that's kind of what we're seeing here. You want me to pause a quick second? You want to say something about this, or shall I keep going?
I'm just marveling at the rise in the soft skills. And I'm wondering if you've got any speculation on why there would be such an increase in that. I'm wondering if the effects of polarization and anxiety and all of the
Mm.
stresses that people are experiencing are making them realize that they're really pushed at the edge of their existing skill set when it comes to dealing with those things.
Absolutely. And whether or not they are being pushed to the edge of their skill set is kind of not related to this list, because they may still be good at it, but they're basically just saying this is what we
This
need.
is what we need. Okay, got it. Yeah, that's great.
And that this is what we need is related to the kinds of things that they are experiencing and being exposed to in their ministries. So the
Hmm.
fact that that exposure has, or the fact that this is arising, means that that exposure has also risen. So I think that that is the main thing that we're seeing different. We're going to be offering this. So you'll see also in the two lists that actually the top 20 is the same. I think only one has kind of jumped out, and something else came in instead of it. But we're going to be offering this again in 27. And so for those on the call if you're at schools that haven't participated, we strongly encourage you to do that. So when we contact the dean, and then we contact the dean to ask for who is your cues coordinator at the school. So if you hear about this, we'll put it in our colloquy as well, and some announcements. So make sure to participate. We had kind of an underrepresentation of alums from schools, diocesan schools in particular. So we want to really kind of bump that up if we can. But we're going to be offering it in 27. And if we have the same 20 top 20 competencies, then I would say this is our list in theological education
Yeah.
in our industry. But what comes in or out of the top 10 might be different based upon what is happening in society and in the world.
So interesting. It's reminding me of the research from the Search Institute that led to the development of the Profiles of Ministry instrument. May it rest in peace. The there seemed to be universality around the competencies required of ministry professionals, regardless of theological position, regardless of context, but the relative emphases placed on those particular skill sets would vary based on ministry context. So it could be that this is yet another iteration in a line of research that has said, actually, there's some consistency in what people need to be able to know, do, and be to serve as a competent ministry professional.
And we'll see that. We'll test that when we get to the 27 iteration. So so that was what we saw, the comparison, but we also wanted to see how well aligned, as I mentioned earlier, that these competencies that alums say that they rely on, how they are aligned to what schools offer. And so we did some analysis with this list against two things that schools could provide. So one was the MDiv curricula, and then the second was their faculty. So let me unpack that just a little bit. So this list, we compared it first to the MDiv curricula of schools whose alums participated in the workforce study. So it's kind of what do schools currently offer? So we pulled those off of all the websites where they were posted, and coded each of the courses into about 38 different topics. Again, I'm not going to show you the whole list, just I excerpted those that had some, connection to the top 20 list because I wanted to make comparisons. So I have this list, and then the numbers indicate the number of instances that a particular course was found for each topic. And I see you smiling, Helen. So you can see
Amazing.
right away, top tier, right? I mean,
Yeah.
these numbers, 93 schools are the schools where we could find these MDiv curricula. 708, 575. That is just those are amazing numbers. Top tier. Not only do we have those numbers, but also we found that 98% of the schools had at least one course in each of those two topics.
Mhm.
Now, there's a second tier, formation, church history, pastoral care. Those are also not numbers to blink at. I mean, those are really they're high numbers, but I think something slightly different is happening, at least for the next one. The third one down is formation. That one, only 43% of the schools said that they offer at least one course in formation. So I think what's happening there is that you've got a smaller set of schools for whom formation is very important, and they are offering multiple courses in formation. Then when you get to the fourth one, church history, that goes back to the pattern that you saw above, where 78% of the schools say that they offer at least one course in church history. So this was the first picture, and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, okay, we're starting to see something. I might have an answer to my alignment question. I then went to another area of what schools offer, and this is more about what the schools can potentially offer, not what they're offering currently, because they have teachers or they have faculty, excuse me, who teach in those areas. So where I went for that was, so there's the ARF form, annual report form process that member schools are required to send institutional data to ATS on an annual basis. And we offer 53 teaching areas as options to categorize each of their faculty. And I grouped those into 18, these 18 high level areas. And then you see the proportion of faculty that teach in each of those areas. So again, top tier, well over a third of ATS faculty teach in Bible,
Yep.
almost a quarter teach in theology. So that's the top tier. Then we have a next tier, pastoral care and church history, both. We've got about 13% that teach in those two areas. Okay, so my brain is going wild now. I had, okay, we've got to make some comparisons. Started with the right two lists, and we saw, okay, very good alignment between faculty and courses. It's kind of a near parallel alignment there. Then I went to the left two lists, not as clear alignment between courses and the workforce needs. Let me show you. So I started with the top competency needs, and I saw, okay, well, they're there, but they're a little bit lower. And then the most common courses, where do those show up in the needs list? Okay, not so much, right? And then we've got some competency needs that we're not even sure where they can be found in the course lists. It's possible that maybe you could find some of those for example, those soft skills in field education. We call them soft skills. We defined it meaning that they don't have a traditional disciplinary home. So I get how it would be harder to find it in the course list, but maybe they're offered in field ed, which would fall under ministry experience, but it's not clear just from the title. And then we've got some common courses that aren't found on the competency needs. The one that I highlighted there is actually in the competency needs, but it's below this top 20. So that means fewer than 10% of the alums named that course, that kind of a course. So what you're seeing is probably what I'm seeing, which is parallel arrangement over here on the right, but more of a crisscross pattern for the left too. Okay, so I took a step back and I said, okay, let's compare all three lists and let's just look at the top half. So we've got about half of the top needs that are found in the course topics. Okay, so generally I was like, okay, not too bad. But when we look at the top needs and the faculty teaching areas, only 20% are found. And then when you look at the teaching areas, almost 90% of the faculty teaching areas are found in the course topics. So again, if this my alignment question, if we're trying to consider what the workforce needs, probably the course topics are better aligned than faculty teaching areas are, but ultimately the best alignment in this entire picture is between course topics and teaching areas, you know.
So let's take a break and a breath. This is a lot of data, and I want to make sure folks are tracking because this is really important. Here's my hot take. Correct me if I'm wrong. It looks like the primary function of theological schools is to provide teaching opportunities for the faculty they have.
I can't hear you. You know, Eva.
So how's the weather there in Seattle, Debbie?
No, exactly. Oh my goodness. Yes.
So, but I'm also going to do a little, well, what about? So one of the things that this does not show is how these courses are taught. These are just topical things. And it is possible for something like a Bible or a theology or even a church history course to be taught in a way that has competencies around education, intrapersonal intelligence, even pastoral care and counseling to be woven into it. So it could be that there's a kind of shadow curriculum in the way these courses are taught that teaches folks about that.
So yes, Helen, short answer, absolutely. One of the limitations of our analysis is that we only went to course titles. We couldn't get to the syllabi. We couldn't talk to the professors. We couldn't go to the schools. We just went with course titles. So that is definitely a significant limitation of the study. And I invite anybody on the call, if you're working on your PhD or if you want some to write a book on something else, go and do this study. Go to the schools and find out exactly how they're teaching it, what they're including in their materials, etc. So we just went by course titles. That said, the students are also just going to the course titles and they're getting interested or not interested in a particular course based upon the course title. So that's something to also keep in mind as you are doing your curriculum revisions, etc.
And I do want to point out, I was just playing a little devil's advocate when I brought that up, but the numbers here are huge. I mean, the difference between the number of Bible courses taught, for example, and the number of pastoral care and counseling courses that are taught is pretty massive. I mean, that's like a 4-to-1, pretty close to 4-to-1 right there.
It is.
No, actually, it's more than a 4-to-1 because 4-to-1 would be about 600 courses and there's 700 Bible courses. So the numbers aren't lying here, and it is a deep invitation to look a little more closely about how the whole curriculum is knit together. And Joanne, you make a great point in the chat that there are also co-curricular and other kinds of options. For example, field education and contextual education, mission trips, intercultural opportunities where some of those soft skills can be taught. However, it sure seems like the preponderance of the MDiv curriculum is still based on stuff that might or might not actually be aligning with what alums are saying their competency needs are. in the
Well,
workplace.
absolutely. We kind of Joanne and I talk about this in this article. You can grab it here. We'll pick it up a little bit later as well when I move on to the next slide. But um, this is a structure and a way of doing theological education that has existed for 100 years or
Yeah.
more.
Yeah.
And so what we're trying to get at right now is just to say, I think we need to think a little bit right size. Is that the
Hmm.
right size? Our understanding of what the degree program is meant to do and be for the formation of clergy. Formation of clergy can't be just the degree program because that's only 3, 4, 5 years of their life.
Hmm.
Every other field that we know of that does service really, they continue
Yeah.
to learn, and there is well, there is one way. The denominations have had some really good curricula, but that connection to the curricula, excuse me, to the denomination is not as strong as it used to be, and not all ministers are working in congregations that have a strong tie to the denomination, or at least that kind of a tie to the denomination. So
Right.
that
If you're talking about congregational polity churches, and if you're talking about non-denominational churches that are kind of a one-stop shop, and the pastor isn't accountable to a large adjudicatory, you don't have that same kind of carrot and stick mechanism. So, I mean, the ideal lifelong learner is somebody who is self-motivated and doesn't require the hammer of somebody in authority over them to pursue this. Like they desiring their own ongoing competence and vitality in their work, they should have the capacities for curiosity and a desire to learn in an ongoing way, which is one of the reasons why I love the verbiage in the standard 3.5, that this idea that you have to cultivate the capacity to be a lifelong learner. And I think a hunger to learn and curiosity are key to that. Um,
at the same time,
yeah,
that hunger, that curiosity may be there, but you've got pastors of small churches, 50 to 100
yeah,
people. They're the only staff person. They're the only pastor, and they're having to do everything from preaching to plumbing and everything in between.
mhm,
It's just to have enough time to carve out to do this on a regular basis. It's a tough thing. So
yeah,
having either a carrot, what did you call it? A carrot or a stick?
yeah,
Yes. Okay, sorry.
yeah.
Yeah, child of immigrants. I don't always know my idioms. I don't keep them straight. So, but yes, absolutely, one or the other will be the way to go in the future, or some version of making more explicit the relationship between the degree program and what happens before or after the degree program. One
I
other
love,
thing,
oh,
go
I
ahead.
was going to say, I love Timothy Lincoln's comment too in the chat about the idea of curricula being to deepen an understanding of the
Mhm.
tradition. I mean, for example, the best professors in church history I've met are the ones who help people understand the role that they play in an ongoing arc that will continue after them. They're active participants in the construction of tradition. And so there's a spirituality to that. There's a way of preaching and interpersonal competency that can come from that if it's taught in a particular way. So I applaud what you're saying about the need to do more research and dig into a little bit more what this is showing. But like I said before, the numbers don't lie.
Yes. Well, and I've presented on this so many times, and most of the time I'm seeing people nodding their heads very quite vigorously. So there's some truth in here somewhere. One last thing I want to say before I move to the next one, which is kind of the crux of lifelong learning piece that I wanted to share, is that one of the groups. So what we did was we said maybe we're seeing misalignment because this is just everybody, all the people, all the alums, and from all their different contexts, and somehow they're just kind of canceling each other out. And maybe there is a group or two or three that for whom there is good alignment, and actually there was. But I'm going to leave you to read the article to find out that information.
Oh, darn.
Yeah. So let me get to this piece here, which is for the webinar. We wanted to identify potential areas that alums need further education and training in. And what I did to do that was to look at it based upon time since graduation. So as I said at the beginning, we've got 3 cohorts. I looked at what are their lists for each of the cohorts. So this was a different question. This was a question, you will recall that the competencies question, there's no direct connection between that question and what schools offer. This question does, because it asked what was not offered, but you wish you could have learned in seminary or theological school. So this one does
Something
have it does have
theology.
Yes, I know, exactly. Right? Now, okay, so I got to say a quick caveat here. Whether the school offered it or not, that information may or may not be accurate. We've heard from schools who say, we offered such and such a course, but the students don't want to take it. We have a hard time recruiting for it. So we get that reality. It may be that the school students just don't want to take it because they go to seminary, with a certain expectation that they're going to take these kinds of courses, or maybe they're not ready to take, or maybe
Yeah,
they're not ready
I
to
think that's
hear
it.
you're really going to need this this
Mhm.
course. And some of these could also be, yes, we took it, but we want more of it, or we
Mhm.
want a different kind of it.
Mhm.
So take that as it is with those caveats, but it's very interesting again to see how administration, finance, and leadership show up as the top
Yeah.
three. This is also what we saw it was top three for Wish Learned in 2017 as well. So
Mhm.
some persistence there. Pastoral care and counseling. Excuse me, I meant to do this. Pastoral care and counseling, technology, a better education experience, and I'll explain what that is in a moment, all were in the top 10. And those rose in rank from the 2017. So those in particular were especially important this time, again, related to ministry during a global health crisis.
Wow.
So so that's our list for the entire group.
Mhm.
What I then did was I wanted to design maybe a 15-year curriculum post seminary. And the way that I thought to do this was to, again, look at it based upon differences by cohort. So I'm going to show you what some of the lists look like for each of the cohorts, or at least what kind of stood out or what changed. What I need to say at the beginning is for all the cohorts, administration, finance, leadership, pastoral care and counseling, theology, and ministry, those were all important for every single one of the cohorts. So just keep that in mind. Now, here were some of the other differences. So for cohort 2010, the only difference that I saw there was how education and teaching actually dropped in rank. It went to 18th. It used to be at 13th or 14th over here. So that was the only difference. In the cohort for 2004, so right now I'm just going to give you the data and then I'll say a few words about it. In 2014, evangelism and mission rose in rank from to 9th from 12th. And then this new one that you haven't seen yet, vocational path. That was a new that was an item that was below the top 20 for the whole group, but for cohort 2014, it rose in salience. And then Bible dropped in rank. And then for
Interesting. Yeah.
and then
The vocational path one, I find that interesting that it's gone up to the top 20, because if you're looking at cohort 2014 and you're doing this study in 21-22, they're at about the 7-year mark, and
yeah,
that's a big watershed decision-making point in people's
interesting.
career trajectories based on the vocational research I've done. So
Okay.
that does not
Makes 100
surprise me
sense.
right
Yep,
there.
that makes
Yeah.
a ton of sense. Now,
Hmm.
what's interesting is that that vocational path was also here in the
Yeah.
cohort 2012, 2019.
That's
So,
because they just started pastoring at the beginning of a
no,
pandemic. I'm
exactly,
like, oh my
exactly.
God, what am I
No, for
doing?
sure, for sure. And basically, what this is showing me is that idea of trying to and what's included in that vocational path theme were things like vocational discernment, knowledge of career alternatives, resources. Do I do licensure or do I do ordination? Some of those pieces that they didn't quite get in seminary, that starts from the moment that they graduate, if not even before, and it continues probably until year 7. So that makes a ton of sense that that showed up here in both lists. Also in the 2019 cohort were in kind of rises in rank of pastoral care and counseling, Bible, and then what was not on the full list was preaching and formation, as well as that vocational path. So those also came up to the top 20.
Mhm.
What was interesting here is that leadership and conflict resolution were not as important for this particular cohort, 2019, than as they were maybe for the other cohorts. So, on a first pass, as far as what seems to be going on here, I think what I'm seeing is that this wish learned item suggests the type of work that they're doing, again, per cohort. So,
Mhm.
just post seminary. And I gotta put a quick caveat here. It's not all the alums just post seminary because I have to look at this particularly by race because I know that African American communities or churches, probably even Asian churches, maybe Latina churches, a lot of the students are already in
Yep.
ministry when they are doing their seminary training. But generally speaking, they're not as much in kind of like high level leadership yet, so they're not having to do a lot of that mediation as much yet. They are having to do more preaching, which maybe they don't have much experience doing that in yet, or they've not as frequently. And so, as they're doing their preaching, needing, oh my goodness, I need to figure out what the Bible says about this particular passage or this topic. They're likely working in some level of education department, maybe they're the children's ministry or the youth ministry, overseeing some kind of formation ministry in their church or organization. And so, again, because of those kind of teaching elements, there is this need to understand the Bible more, or under because Sunday school and some of those things have to do with the Bible. And again, as we mentioned, they are dealing with questions about vocational trajectory. So that would be cohort 2019. That's approximately what they're probably doing in their church or ministry. Cohort 2014. So they're 5 to 10 years out from graduation, not maybe as closely working in the education department. So maybe having fewer needs related to understanding the Bible. They are now expanding the kind of ministry and areas that they're doing in the church, maybe overseeing evangelism and mission department, maybe looking at church growth or recruiting members for the church or members for the organization and ministry that they're a part of. So maybe something like that is going on for that group, still dealing with questions about vocational trajectory. And thanks again for that piece that you said about 7 years out. And then those who are 10 to 15 years out, likely they're out of the education department now, because a lot of times the education department is kind of a stepping stone to something better. But again, we need to look at that by gender, because more than likely a lot of women, there's probably an overrepresentation of women in those areas. But note again here how vocational trajectory is not in the top 20 for this cohort. So they've gone past that hump and probably are feeling like, okay, this is my area now. All right, so those are the data. I want to say real quick though, if we were to build a curriculum, we can go more into that in a minute here, Helen, after you share your slides. But I just want to keep in mind that if you're building a curriculum for all the cohorts, administration, finance, leadership, pastoral care and counseling, theology, and ministry are all really important. You can't go wrong offering courses in these areas. However, I would recommend that instead of offering it the way that seminary offers it, consider offering it in different ways. So I actually presented this at a faculty gathering, ATS faculty gathering, and one of the Bible professors, she said, "Oh, of course, I'm a Bible professor, but I never teach just Bible. I never just teach a book of the Bible. I teach Bible and then fill in the blank. So Bible and social justice, Bible and how to do administration. What does the Bible say about finance, etc. So Bible and so this kind of integration. So that's one thing that I would consider. I would urge us to consider, all of you to consider. I'll also urge you to consider shorter courses in any of the areas in this bottom half of the top 20. So remember, there's a lot more below this. So this isn't just because these are small, all of them, these are smaller percentages because we offered only fewer opportunities to say something about it. But these would be great. Smaller, especially these soft skills, interpersonal competencies, intercultural competencies. And then the last thing is better education experience. That was really interesting kind of thing that came up and that was coded. And let me say a little bit more about that right now, because I have the code trees, by the way. So if you're interested in more details, let me know, email me, and I can send those to you. but just for fodder for us talking about it here in a few minutes, these are the kinds of things that we saw in administration. So it was people administration, project administration, and also volunteer. We don't learn that in seminary. I didn't. I took church administration, but I didn't learn any of that. For finance, these were some of the subtopics. So financial literacy, but also budgeting, personal finances, as well as the school, church's finances, all, even how to start a private practice. This would be those don't who aren't working in congregations, maybe nonprofits. And then this last one, especially, this is what, remember, a better education experience. This was quite different. It wasn't a particular course. It was more about what was my experience there? What was my journey like? They wanted more support, more communication, more choices, but also stronger community. So as we think about lifelong learning, I know that we've been really focused on the kinds of courses that and topics that we would want to teach or offer, but is there a place in lifelong learning where building community in some way, could that also be part of the way that we think about how to do lifelong learning?
That's
All
a
right, so I'll
great
stop there.
segue. No, that's a great segue. This is just fascinating, and I think it gives those of us who are in lifelong learning a lot to chew on. One of the things that I think about is instead of framing this as let's say, shortcomings in the seminary education, it could well be that there are a number of these things that people aren't ready to learn about until they're out of seminary and in a place. So there's a way in which the need to cultivate an appetite for just-in-time learning needs to be part of how we help um, ministers in training understand what it's going to be like to do this over the long haul. Like we could give them this stuff when they're in seminary, but if they, in seminary, they're learning how to be seminarians, not how to be pastors. It's when they go out into the pastorate that they're really learning what it's like to be boots on the ground and doing this work. And that's when there are places for some of this good content to actually stick. Otherwise, we're trying to answer questions they haven't asked yet. And I think that's why lifelong learning isn't an antidote to a seminary education. It's a necessary continuation of formation in an ongoing way that anybody needs in order to continue vibrancy in their position. So yeah, that carrot and the stick thing, I tend to be more of a carrot fan because I want people to be self-motivated to do this. On the other hand, I don't see how it's possible to retain any level of competence without being self-motivated enough to seek out opportunities to learn where your shortcomings are. And that, of course, requires a certain amount of self-knowledge too. So let's go to the next slide. We'll dive into some of our stuff here. So just to give you guys a heads up, in 2020 and then again in 2025, Alam conducted two landscape surveys of leaders in lifelong learning for ministry in theological schools. There are a number of places where lifelong learning for ministry happens, including denominations and judicatories, retreat centers and freestanding shops, and in fact, the Doctor of Ministry degree used to be included under the umbrella of lifelong learning, according to our predecessor organization, SOCM. We did our first survey into theological schools because it's an easy to identify population. The other populations are going to be a little bit more constructivist as we look to identify the players in those areas to be able to do the survey with them. We looked at leaders and their demographics, the structures and content of their program, where they're located, how they're funded, what's the economic model. We looked at levels of institutional support for these programs, and then we looked at what the leaders' perceptions were, both in terms of their own functioning within their job, as well as whether or not their institutions actually supported this work as a vibrant part of the whole ecosystem of theological education. In October, you'll see at the very end, I'm going to be actually leading a webinar that goes through all of these data and talks about the comparison, what we learned in 2020 and then 2025. And between those 2 years, we saw a lot of growth. So in 2020, we had 84 identified lifelong learning programs in 273 ATS member schools, and we got 41 responses. It's a really good response rate. We think it's because everybody was shut down during the pandemic and going, wait, there's a survey, I've got time to do this. But in reality, we found that our lifelong learning leaders were really, really busy during the pandemic. In 25, we identified at least 138 programs in 289 schools, which is a huge increase in just 5 years. And what we suspect is that the pathways to ministry grants supported by the Lilly Endowment were a huge influence in that. A scan of proposals for that particular initiative showed that at least half of the what is it, 106, 108 schools that received grants looked like they were doing something like lifelong learning, continuing education, certificate programs that are outside of degree programs as a significant part of their project proposal. So anyways, lots of growth. ATS numbers are showing between 23 and 24, there's a 24.2% increase in enrollment in these programs, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. Here at Columbia, we had our biggest year ever last year, so there's a huge demand for all of this. So what we asked about was, what were the content areas that you teach? Check all that apply, and then tell us, what are the top three, the most frequent ones that you teach? So in the first two numeric columns, you'll see the data for 2020. The column on the left shows the number of schools that actually named these topic areas, and the next column is how many of those schools put them in the top three. So if and the same sets of data for 25 in the next two columns. So if you could go to the next slide, Debbie, where I've outlined some numbers. It's really interesting. First of all, there's almost no movement from 2020 to 2025 in terms of the top threes. And number two, there's a pretty good reference point for these numbers vis-a-vis what your people say they want. So on the one hand, we're doing okay in lifelong learning by teaching lots and lots of leadership stuff, which they say they need. And leadership includes all of those subtopics that you're talking about. It could be leadership functioning, administrative tasks, leadership philosophy, all of those kinds of things. But then what are the other top areas? Theology, we've got spirituality, and then we've got biblical interpretation right up there too. When I take a look at these lists, what occurs to me is that these lists look an awful lot like the faculty who teach in the theological schools. That one area down near the bottom, training, and then the other one, other. Other is just kind of random stuff. We said if you're going to check other, please tell us what you're putting in there. That would be things like social justice programs, faith and arts programs, psychoanalysis. There are lots of different one-offs that are in there, and I just collected them together into a single category. And training actually has, when I looked at what people called training, some overlap with pastoral counseling. It really has to do with some of the practical arts that people have to employ when they're doing their ministry work. So if you could go to the next one. We also asked them who teaches in your programs, and what we discovered is, yes, a lot of outside experts. You get a lecturer from the outside to come in and do a thing, but by and large, the faculty are the primary teaching people in 86% of the cases, which means that you've got a lot of lifelong learning programs in theological schools that are going to look an awful lot like the curricula that these faculty teach, which for me raises really interesting questions about what the perceived function of lifelong learning is in these institutions. Is it really to respond to ministry needs and some of the gaps that we've identified through your study? Or is it a place where the faculty can kind of play in a fun sandbox and the seminary can create alternative avenues to accessing the intellectual capital they have on campus through these seminary light, as I'll call them, programs? Is this teacher driven? Or is this student driven or participant or constituent need driven? That's a really interesting question. One of the things that I am hearing from the interviews that we've been doing, and I don't have the data crunched on that yet, but a lot of lifelong learning programs have been developed as ways to create alternative access points to the goods and resources the institution already has, particularly its faculty and those intellectual resources. So also lifelong learning offices are almost exclusively housed within offices of academic affairs. And as you and I were chatting before the start of the webinar, what that means is that there's already prevailing narrative about what appropriate seminary or ministry education looks like. That dominates, let's say, in curricula and the curriculum development, and therefore it's a narrative that might well affect what's happening in lifelong learning programs as well. That's just speculation on my part, but it does give us an interesting question to ask, which is, what do we, especially those of us in lifelong learning, and then more largely theological schools, need to pay attention to moving forward? And with the about 10 minutes left we've got, Debbie, I would love to hear your thoughts on that, and then we'll take a couple of questions as they emerge from our audience.
So you're asking me what does our findings, what do our combined findings have to do with lifelong learning then?
And what should we be paying attention to moving forward? So it's both, I mean, we're interested, of course, in lifelong learning through Alum, but theological schools need to be paying attention to this too. So what are some of the things that are percolating for you right now?
So one of the things that and maybe I should go, the slide is actually the next slide. So, okay, I won't go there yet. Um, the, well, here, let me go backwards. How about that? Go backwards. Oh no, it was actually, sorry, it was not the other, it was the other way. It was one more back. Anyway, what I think is important is when we mentioned this in the article is that in the future, we expect that schools are going to, and we named 3 C's, just, alliteratively. We named they're going to be more comprehensive, more curated, or more connected. And the comprehensive are, kind of these schools that are going to look at every stage of a person, minister's career or professional trajectory. So at the point of discernment, at the point of actually learning, like the degree, at the 5 years out, 10 years out, 15 years out, just to kind of be the entity that ministers will identify with. I need to go here when I'm at this stage, when I'm at this stage, et cetera. So kind of more comprehensive.
Mm-hmm.
The curated is a school that thinks, okay, we are really good at this one area and let's just double down on that and then figure out some of these other partners out there that might be able to help at different stages of the minister's life. The connected are those schools from the very beginning design their degree program curricula, their lifelong learning curricula, everything else, even maybe at the front when ministers are discerning, everything is connected from that early point, meaning they are making integrated courses from the get-go.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll see, and maybe some combination of these is what we feel is going to happen in the future. But ultimately, if you heard in all of that, the seminary is not the only entity anymore. So it's kind of this idea of looking at a broader ecology of those who are
Yes.
helping to form ministers. Now, lifelong learning programs, my understanding is that learning programs are all kind of housed within seminaries. Is that a
No, that most seminaries, it would appear, are looking at lifelong learning or actually developing programs. I mean, the number that we were able to identify with a review of all of the websites was, I think I said 130, I just lost my paper, 130 something or other, 138 out of the 289 member schools, and that's constantly in flux. I also almost weekly talk to people from different schools that are saying, yeah, we've been given the charge to put together a lifelong learning program. What does this look like? First of all, it takes like at least 3 years for something to be up and running. So it's not something you can just do on the fly. But We also know that there are lots of really vibrant lifelong learning opportunities that are outside of theological schools, and Alam actually has members from all of those different kinds of places as well. So some freestanding shops, people who are education directors at retreat centers, um, people who are doing this through umbrella organizations like IATH or HTI. These are all places where some kind of lifelong learning, in other words, educational opportunities to support the vibrancy and efficacy of ministries and ministers. All of it's happening in all of those places. And certainly Thad Austin and Katie Camo, when they were doing their clergy well-being study, identified lifelong learning as happening in a lot of places too.
Good.
One of the issues is this rapid growth and proliferation has led to some fragmentation. And
Mhm.
one of the things I love about conversations like this is it gets everybody back to the campfire and says, wait a minute, like before you go running off into the Wild West and do something, let's actually pay attention to what our motivations are and what data are informing the decisions that we're making about what these programs need to look like. Like, if you want to develop a program, have you actually done a market study to show what your intended audience actually needs? And we're finding that a lot of places are not actually doing that, which leads me to have some deep wondering about what the motivations are for setting up these programs in the first
Right.
place.
You mentioned that earlier, and I meant to say that ATS is actually launching another study that kind of uh, piggybacks or kind of uh, builds off of your
Right.
study, where we're going to be asking questions like that, like what is the purpose? Why are you doing this particular program? And then also trying to find more of the language that is being used to describe the courses. That's
Hmm.
another that fragmentation and one of the pieces of fragmentation that you mentioned. Are you doing a badge? Are you doing a certificate? Are you doing a credential? What is it that you're doing? Is there an outside source that is coming to accredit that credential, et cetera? So we're going to launch from where you ended. We'll start from there.
Hmm.
So hopefully we'll find out some information on that, the non-degree programs. But getting back to your original question about what should we be looking out for the future, I did, based upon these three tables here, I kind of thought about okay, what would be some courses? What would be some curricula and I don't know whether it makes sense to do curricula based upon different life periods. Uh, I mean, would that make sense? Would it, those who just graduated, I mean, do you target in that way? Um,
We would have to poll the folks who do these programs. I did talk to one leader of a program that does exactly that kind of targeting based on the stage they're at after graduation, and they run a brilliant program. So I do think there's a lot of wisdom to that. I'm aware that we're running on time, and folks probably have things to bump to. Let's go to the last slides where we've got other ways for people to learn. In many ways, this conversation is just beginning. We've got webinars through ATS and through Alum. Our Alum webinars, you don't have to be a member to join the webinar. You do have to be a member to access the recording on the back-end member portal site. As I said, I'll be talking about the data on October 21st, and there are lots of great webinars at ATS about global issues, about data, about leadership, about the studies that they're doing. The ESQ, I always, because I did the Qs when I was at ATS, I'm really fond of them and think they get great data about people's motivations and what their expectations of seminary are. So I'd highly recommend those. And then if you go to the next slide, um, once again, we have the QR code for the study that Debbie was talking about, and this is the Alum code. The last slide has our contact information. I mean, there's so much more that could be said about all of this, and there's some really great conversation in the chat. Would love to continue this conversation on October 21st with all of you, or email me privately if you want to talk more. Somebody did ask about the availability of the slides. We're going to PDF them and put them on the member portal for Alum members. Debbie, it is always so much fun to talk to you. Any last words you want to offer our good people before we bump off?
oh, just go ahead and cheerlead this. I mean, yeah, absolutely. We can do it together.
Exactly.
Thank you so much for having me.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. And thanks everybody else too for joining us today. It was so great to have you here.